Good morning, AP Psych Geniuses. Welcome to Module 9. Today we're going to be really focusing on learning and those concepts of learning to refresh our memories there. So our first objective is that the student will be able to differentiate between classical and operant conditioning, and that the student will be able to accurately apply concepts of learning to real-world scenarios. So here are the answers to your do now. Hopefully you're able to recognize that 1 and 3 are talking about classical conditioning. 2 and 4 are operant conditioning, and that operant conditioning involves a voluntary behavior, while classical conditioning involves an involuntary behavior. So we make a decision if we want the reward or the punishment involved with an operantly conditioned behavior. Whereas classical conditioning, it just happens without much control on our part. So let's look at this example of classical conditioning. When I first adopted Desi, he didn't know that when I grabbed his leash, it meant we were going for a walk. I would have to take him outside before he would start to wag his tail. Now, every time I grab his leash, he automatically wags his tail. I want you to pause the video and identify the US, UR, NS, CS, and CR in this example. There's a space in your class packet to get this done. All right, so our unconditioned stimulus is going outside, and our unconditioned response is Desi wagging his tail. Without any training or learning happening, going outside is naturally going to cause him to wag his tail. The neutral stimulus in this example is the leash. After Desi learns to start associating the leash with going outside, the leash becomes the conditioned stimulus and now causes him to wag his tail. Don't forget that the repetitiveness you're seeing here is consistent across all classical conditioning examples. The unconditioned response is always going to be the same as the conditioned response. And then, the neutral stimulus is always the same as the conditioned stimulus. All right, so I want to challenge you to apply, it's kind of like you're doing an FRQ, some other terms or concepts to this example. So I want you to think about what these concepts would look like in the same example. Push pause, take a moment to answer in your class packet. All right, so let's look at higher order conditioning first. The definition of that word, and I hope you noticed that I took the time to put these definitions into my own words. Some of them I did have to look up to refresh my memory of what's the exact definition to make sure I wasn't making any common mistakes. But I did put them all in my own words. I did not do any copy and pasting. So higher order conditioning is when the neutral stimulus is paired with another neutral stimulus, and now both of those stimuli cause the conditioned response. So if I apply that to this example, every time I got Desi's leash, I also put my shoes on. Now when I just put my shoes on, he wags his tail. So he is wagging his tail, that conditioned response, when I get his leash and when I put his shoes on. So there's two conditioned stimuli now. All right, take a minute, check your own answer. Feel free to pause here if you need to, but we're going to move on. So extinction, the definition of extinction, again in my own words, is when the unconditioned stimulus is not paired with the conditioned stimulus. So the conditioned stimulus stops causing the conditioned response. So the application, I start picking up Desi's leash when I leave, but I don't take Desi outside. After a while, Desi stops wagging his tail when I grab his leash. Please notice a few important things in here. The conditioned stimulus still has to be involved, but is no longer paired with that conditioned response, okay? Or it's no longer paired with that unconditioned stimulus, right? So I'm getting his leash, but I'm not taking him outside. So that conditioned stimulus stops being associated with the unconditioned stimulus. All right, moving on. Spontaneous recovery. Notice I left this in bold. After extinction, the conditioned stimulus causes the conditioned response again spontaneously. So after this has happened, right, the conditioned stimulus will then again cause the conditioned response. So after the tail wagging, sorry for that typo, after the tail wagging behavior had been extinguished randomly one day, I grabbed the leash and he wagged his tail. All right. So after he'd stopped wagging his tail for the leash, now he does it again. All right, generalization. Okay, generalization is the conditioned response is caused by multiple similar stimuli. So if I apply this, I could say Desi wags his tail when I grab his leash and when I grab a rope, right? A rope and a leash look kind of similar, so Desi can't tell the difference. He's generalizing. Please note the difference between generalization and higher order conditioning. So I know this might sound similar because he is applying that conditioned response to more than one stimulus. However, he hasn't been conditioned, right, to believe that the rope means going outside. He just isn't telling the difference between a rope and a leash. Okay. Whereas with higher order conditioning, he was conditioned to know that putting on my shoes and grabbing the leash both meant we're going outside. So those were both causing involuntarily that conditioned response. All right, and then discrimination. So the definition of that is the subject can tell the difference between the conditioned stimulus and other stimuli. Application. When I grab a scarf, Desi does not wag his tail. Right? A scarf and a leash, kind of similar looking. They're long and floppy. But Desi does not associate the scarf with going outside, but the leash is associated with going outside. All right, hopefully those made sense to you. Make sure you're taking time to make sure your notes look good and solid and ready to rock, and move on to thinking about some operant conditioning. Bye, all.